Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. Welcome to the EdTech Situation Room, episode 210 for February the 24th, 2021. My name is Wes Fryer. I am the innovation specialist. Man, you'd think I'd know this. I have a cool title. Somebody made it up. I'm an innovation and technology integration specialist. That's it. At the Cassidy School here in Oklahoma City, where it hit 72 degrees yesterday, and we do not have any more ice on our lake. Joining me, as always, is Dr. Jason Neiffer, who probably didn't see 72 degrees today in Missoula. How is there snow still on the ground for you, sir?
There is still snow on the ground, but the reason why I'm chuckling is because we had some warmer weather today too, but it got up to a balmy 37. So, and it was sunny, which meant that there had been a little bit of frost on my sidewalk that I thought I was going to have to add some ice melt to make sure it wasn't slick for our delivery folk. But sadly, we did not hit the 70s today. And I know I have family in Texas that had been reporting that they saw 0 and 78 in the same 48 hours. So, yeah, I don't really understand that. I can't wrap my brain around that one. Although I do remember once growing up here in Montana, which, by the way, I'm Jason Neiffer. I'm the assistant director of the Montana Digital Academy, Montana State Virtual School, located in the University of Montana campus here in Missoula, Montana. But
you can't even tell that he's a debater, ladies and gentlemen.
No, you can't.
Never ever guess that.
No, you really can't. But I do remember that there was a really late spring snow when I was probably a senior in high school, where it dumped snow for for like 48 hours, and then the weather quickly shifted and it was suddenly 68 degrees and we had like 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it quickly turned into a massive like snow bog in Great Falls, the city that I grew up in. So, but Wes, I'd love to talk about the weather for the next hour, but I don't think that's our agenda. What is the EdTech Situation Room?
Well, Jason and I are here to talk about the past week's tech news. And tonight, if you want to visit our document, as always, on edtechsr.com/links, you'll find the links for episode 210. We've got some breaking news. We have connectivity articles, Google News, Apple News, Microsoft News. And then these are always fun to try to categorize. So we have social media, privacy, and security, which can kind of run together a bit, the tech correction, and a number of miscellaneous articles, which we may not get to, but we probably will get to at least a few. And the old geek of thy week will wrap us up. So where shall we begin tonight's discussions, Dr. Neiffer?
Well, I was going to cue up our breaking news bumper, but I'm just going to have to mimic it here. Shugung, gung, 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 gung. Announced this morning, and Wes, I'm not sure if you know about Fry's Electronics.
I've been to their Austin stores many times, yes.
Good. So Fry's Electronics has announced that they are closing nationwide, and the reason why that I have a wisp of sadness in my eyes tonight for Fry's is that Fry's has been a really big part of my kind of computer life for the last really almost 25 years. And for those of you that have never got to experience Fry's Electronics was an independently owned chain of electronic stores, and what I loved about them is that all of them were really different. Some of them had themes, some of them had a lot of stock, some of them were much smaller, and the stock was much less. But to kind of date myself with why Fry's was so important to me, I built my first computer from scratch. Actually, my first scratch-built computer came from parts that I picked up from Fry's. It was the spring of my first year of teaching. I was just substituting that year. And it was my first year of teaching. And I decided that I was going to go to Portland for spring break, which is where I spent a lot of spring breaks and weekend trips because a lot of my friends from high school lived in Portland. And so I literally drove up to the train in Shelby, Montana, north central Montana. I spent a day and a half getting to Portland by a train. I built a computer there, and then I turned around and took the computer and boarded the train. It like literally had this box, big clunky desktop box after I built it from Fry's parts at a friend's apartment in Portland, and then turn around and put my feet up on it on the train on the way home. And I bought my first iPad at Fry's. I've bought endless peripherals at Fry's. It's been a really big part of my kind of electronics life. So I'm sad today that Fry's is closing.
And if I could play the bagpipes or the fiddle, I would be playing an appropriate, what is that, a dirge to, yes, commemorate the moment. Well, yes. So I used to go down to TCA forever. And when I moved to Oklahoma, I just went cold turkey. I haven't been there for, since 2005 probably. But that was a pilgrimage. So we would go to, what's the name of Papacitos? Has some of the best fajitas of a chain that I've ever found. So we'd have to hit Papacitos and we'd have to go to Fry's. And yeah, we're talking about just mega tech land. I think maybe I've been to one of the ones in Dallas and maybe Plano or something like that as well. But it interesting. Sign of the times. It is. I make a couple other quick comments about the death of Fry's, because I think that it's easy to blame it on the pandemic, but Fry's was actually in trouble well before the pandemic hit in 2020. And I was trying to figure out when's the last time I visited a Fry's. I'm guessing it was 2 years ago. And I've probably been to 4 or 5 of them, maybe more. Seattle and Portland were the 2 that I frequented the most. I also have hit 2 or 3 of them in Silicon Valley, the kind of broader San Jose area. But the articles talk about the fact that a lot of it was competition from Amazon and places like Best Buy. But to be frank, if I had availability of a Fry's in my town for nerdy electronic stuff, I'd much rather go and pick it up at the store, I think, that buy it from Amazon, in part because if it's a Saturday project and you're putting together a computer, then it's better to pick up the parts when you're building the computer and then be able to take them back if it doesn't work out for whatever reason. I hear a rumor, Wes, that you're not a cat. And then they talked about how that 2 years ago they started experiencing some financial troubles, and one of the ways they dealt with that was basically becoming a consignment store where they would make deals with manufacturers of computers and electronic parts, and they put them on the shelves and then wouldn't pay the manufacturer until after they sold the part itself. And I had heard that that stores were starting to have large aisles of empty shelves. This was well before the pandemic hit, and that became a real issue as well. So again, rest in peace, Fry's. You've provided a lot of delight to the masses, and I'm excited to see other people's stories of what Fry's has meant to them. So yeah, absolutely. Man, you're still, what are you on? Are you still on your Windows PC? I've not been able to find a good virtual background app for that I can use here with StreamYard. So
yeah, I am still on my PC. Just a kind of a minor update there. I finally got a docking station that allows me to run both a 4K monitor and my side monitor. It was I found it's a $300 docking station, but I found a used one for about $75 on eBay. So I picked that up and I'm using it now. The lack of Google Drive on my MacBook M1 is still a problem for me to use it as a primary workstation at work. But this leads us into a couple quick Mac articles I wanted to share. There's a really interesting article from the Linus Tech Tip forums. And for those of you that are not schooled in Linus Tech Tips, it's a popular YouTube channel that does reviews of technology. And it's pretty high geekdom. But there was a post, and now it's been picked up by other mainstream news media outlets, talking about how a lot of M1 Mac owners are running into interesting issues because their SSD is getting used much more quickly than it would be on a previous Intel Mac. And for those unaware, SSD drives, this has never happened to me personally, but SSD drives have a shelf life or a use life to them. You can only do X number of reads and writes on an SSD drive before it fails. And I did see this at a criticism of the new integrated storage on the M1 Max, because you can't pull the drive out and then put a new drive in. It's all integrated into the motherboard. And there's apparently some commands you can run that will show you the number of times that the drive is overwriting certain sectors on the hard drive. And the idea here is that, if this happens, if you're a heavy user of the machine and it's reading and writing too much, then it would have a much lower lifespan than it would otherwise. And a lot of tech folks are speculating that one of the benefits of the integrated systems, the memory and the storage is integrated directly on the motherboard, not with third-party parts, is that you can utilize what's referred to as swap, which is taking stuff in memory, RAM, the working memory of a computer, and then writing it to a hard drive. But since it's so fast because it's integrated, that it can keep really heavy speed, but it would have to write to the drive a lot. So I would call this an ongoing story. And obviously, if hard drives fail within 6 months of buying a Mac M1, Apple's going to have to do something about that, or they will cease to exist as a company. So I'm sure there's a solution on the way.
Yeah, that is crazy. I had to give mine up. I was able to test drive for maybe 3 weeks or so an M1 Mac and really did enjoy it. I mean, I'm back to a year and a half, 2-year-old MacBook Pro with Touch Bar, and honestly, I'm not seeing a huge difference. But for an $800 machine, which is what you're able to buy those 128 gig M1 MacBook Airs for, it is a tremendous machine. And I will say also that just needing to be agile like that, man, having everything in Google Drive and then also an iCloud drive. My son, a couple of years ago, I guess, on a visit had just happened to show me something on his phone where he had it on iCloud. It was from his computer. I was like, what's that? Because I have Google Drive. Why would I want iCloud Drive? But being able to have that turned on, and we stepped up to whatever the 2 terabits for the family, and we're not even using maybe even a third of that. But it is phenomenal, and it just definitely makes the switching back and forth between devices fantastic. But I would expect Apple to address that in some way, because that is not gonna fly with Mac users, as you said.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
Then you dropped the malware article in there too. This is a pretty significant Apple article.
Yeah, Ars Technica reported on February 20th, that there has been, this is the second time a piece of malware has been found that is built natively for M1 Macs. And we had an article on this a couple weeks ago that I don't think we got to, and it's sad because I wanted to make this joke. I stole this from Paul Thurrott, which it was pretty funny, but the first discovery of M1 Mac native malware, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Paul Thurrott made the comment on Twitter but Mac users are reporting that it's really speedy and fast on the new M1, and I thought that was a pretty funny comment. But the reason why this particular malware is concerning is because there are 30,000 Macs confirmed that have this new malware, M1 Macs that have this new malware, but it doesn't really seem to do anything. It checks in with a server every hour to see if there's new instructions, but there doesn't seem to be a payload associated with it, or at least there's not one that's integrated into the system itself. And so, I mean, I don't really run third-party antivirus on PCs. Wes, I think we've talked about this in the past. Do you run anything on your Macs?
No, and then as a school desisted from everything except Windows Defender on Windows 10 systems. And no, we had Kaspersky for quite a while, but it just really hasn't seemed to be necessary. And there's a trade-off always when you run these third-party systems, especially with low-level access and skins and everything. So no, we haven't done that at school for quite a while, and I don't do any of that personally anymore. But I did have a license for something for a while that we did it on at home, but it's been more than 2 to 3 years since we stopped, I think.
Yep. Well, and the thing that I keep thinking about personally is that while I am super interested in obviously staying safe on the Mac. And I've probably had maybe two 1.5 infections in my 25 30 years of computer use, because I am super careful, right? And it's something that I'm at least proactive about, if not paranoid. But Macs are not immune to malware. They're a lot less likely to get it, because there are less developers for it, although as more Macs come on the scene, that will certainly impact things. But just an interesting phenomenon that M1 Macs are now getting targeted.
And Peggy is in our chat room. Hello, Peggy. And she's asking the question, how would you get that malware? The articles that I've read didn't indicate how people did get it. And I'm pretty sure they would have said that if they knew. So it really is another evolving case. And it's something that, I don't know if you had mentioned this, but it includes a self-destruct feature. So not only is it specifically made for M1 Macs, and they don't know that the malware is phoning home, so it's making a connection to a command computer somewhere. They don't know for sure what that will do. And they also don't know, it has a self-destruct feature that's really advanced for that kind of malware. So this could be very sophisticated nation-state sponsored software. And there's not any indication in the articles that I've read. Jason put the Ars Technica piece in there, so I didn't put another one. I read on another site the same article, and it doesn't indicate how you get it, which is also a little bit troubling. So, or a way that you can find out if you have it. So are we among the 30,000 that have it? I don't know. So
I certainly don't know. So I may check on that tomorrow. And and I'm not using it as a production machine yet. It's mostly a curiosity more than anything else to me. So
yeah, okay. All right. Well, hey, how about some Google news? We covered a bit last week about the Learning with Google 2021 event. And actually, Peggy, thanks to her Nuzzle newsletter, which I receive daily, had shared a really great summary post that Eric Kurtz, who's from Ohio. And if you don't follow Eric Kurtz, just drop everything right now. Follow him on Twitter. His website, Control-Alt-Achieve. I'll drop this into the chat. Eric wrote a wonderful summary post of these changes. I have I've seen a little over an hour of the hour and a half, presentation that they gave last week. And the thing that I'm most interested in, and I've got a link to this. I don't think I'll drop this into the chat right now because it's a video, but we'll put it in the show notes. At 46 minutes and 8 seconds into the presentation, they talk about how rostering by the central IT office or the central administration of your school district, and then also a learning management system, gradebook sync, are features that are coming. There's a lot of really, really good announcements in this. As we talked about last week, and I think we titled the episode last week, Google Education Pivots. They went from something like 30 or 40 million users to 150 million users in a year. And they are substantially pivoting to a paid model for the advanced features. Still, you can get all the free features that we've had, but there's a whole lot of new features, especially features that are great for remote learning and security and other things that you're going to need to pay for. So those are summarized really well in that Eric Kurtz article. And the more that I've heard about this and the more that I see, the more that I like. Some of them are small things. In forums, there's always been an issue where, if you leave that forum and come back or whatever, it doesn't save. And, that's being addressed. Some of these things are going to be addressed soon. Some have already been done. But I'm very pleased with everything that I've seen, and there's some really compelling stories told through video in that presentation. It is like an Apple event, right? We have these different events that Apple does where they'll tell their story and they'll talk about their products. Google's doing that too, and both of them are doing it really well, through video, and Google intersperses different product managers and folks representing different parts of the Google product universe with these stories of here in Italy, here's how we responded. Here in Kenya, here's how we responded. Here in, Colombia. And I actually thought it was cool too that they left the language in the native language and just did English subtitles, which is interesting. I mean, this is for an English audience, but anyway, very well done. And my overall is pretty positive as I continue to process this, but it's a ton of information and updates from Google to try and process. Do you have any new thoughts on all of this, Dr. Neiffer?
I do. I did end up in some discussions about the 100 terabyte storage limit that will now be put in place. And I know that Eric's article goes into some detail about that. And a reminder from last week, it's 100 terabytes per school. And I was peripheral to some discussions last week from some schools in Montana that had kind of hit the panic button on that one a little bit, because they felt that really limited the usefulness of the free tier of Google. But as it turns out, most of the people I know that did run a check on their storage use were using dramatically less than 100 terabytes. And I'll give you an example from my own organization. I did run a storage report at our state virtual school, and our Google domain has been up now for, well, it would be 11 years this March. And so it's been going a long time. And the other thing that I would also note is that, not during that entire time have we had Google Drive. So storage hasn't always been taken up, but of the 100 terabytes we have available to us, which, by the way, doesn't take that limit doesn't take place until next summer. That's July 2022. The fact of the matter is that we're only using 17 terabytes out of 100, and we have one user that's using 16 terabytes, and that's me, because I have a bunch of weekly backups of courses, because I am a backup hoarder that I could probably delete 99% of with zero implication to my organization. And the only reason why I didn't do so is both because of time and because there was no storage need. A couple smaller schools that talked about looking at it, there was one that had 600 users that was using 2 terabytes total, and never thought they would hit the 100 terabytes. Now, storage and that kind of capacity, never say never, right? Because stuff keeps getting bigger and yada, yada, yada. But I think 100 terabytes per instance is enormously generous. And, you are
using T with for a terabyte, right?
Yeah, I mean, terabyte. Yeah.
That's great. It's crazy.
And the reality is, excuse me, I need to get my cough button in place here. One moment.
The reality is that's a crazy amount of storage. And yeah, unless there's something wrong going on,
right.
I don't know. I mean, if you're talking about a university, now that's a different ballpark, but I think we're talking about the K-12 institutions. I mean, and there are some huge, K-12 institutions. My friend Eric is the tech director in Oklahoma City, and they're part of this large schools consortium, and Oklahoma City is a really small member of that. I mean, we have about 55,000 students, I think, but some of these huge systems, Florida schools that are districts really that are county-wide, and New York City public, Chicago public, they're enormous. So I don't know. Is that going to look different for the mega I would think for the mega districts, it's going to have to maybe look different, because that's just enormously.
Well, and my guess is Google's reached out to some of the mega districts that you're referring to. And I think they said in their announcement last week that less than 2% of districts were even approaching the 100 terabyte mark. And, it also wouldn't make sense for a district like Chicago Public to, spend, $3 a kid. That's a big chunk of money it would take. But I'm almost certain that a multinational like Google is cutting deals. So we're not going to be in a position to upgrade. We're going to stay with the free tier, at least for the time being. And it's not because we don't value the Google service. It's because we just don't need much more than that, because we have an LMS, and we are building most of our learning capacity in Moodle instead. But I think it's very positive, and I love where Google with Education is going.
Yeah, definitely. And I just today saw that you're going to be able to schedule the breakout rooms in advance. You're going to be able to in the meet calls for everybody at one time. You're going to be able to turn on or off the ability for students to mute and unmute. It just reminds me a little bit of iPhone, Android, where iPhone would come out with something new and people would say, "Oh, well, Android's had that forever." It's a lot like Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Zoom is having all of these features pretty much. I mean, for the most part. But you've got another article in there that's about another announcement that was in that, and that was the 9 to 5 article, or 9 to 5 Google from February 17th. Chrome OS recording tool coming in March, 40 education Chromebooks set for this year. That's an astounding number of Chromebooks. As I heard this announcement today, when I heard that part of the Learning with Google 2021 presentation, that reminded me of Apple, right? Because this happens sometimes where there'll be a great app, a great feature, and then, oh, well, guess what, folks? That's now built in. But I applaud Google for doing that, including built-in screencasting. Screencastify has been the go-to screencasting tool that I've really, utilized with my students. But it is so important to have that capability. And I think that screencasting for not only teachers, but students also is just a core competency. Like all of us need to know how to screencast and then, work on those skills. So yay Google for that.
Absolutely. And I would also say too that what I really love about that is that my program works in context of upwards of 150 different schools a semester with 150 different IT directors, 150 different philosophies. Some schools refuse to allow students to install third-party plugins to allow for things like screencasting. And
Wow.
Wes, I couldn't agree more that it's a critical functionality in 2021, if for no other reason than it really does help communicate things like troubleshooting components of a course. But I am absolutely convinced that that there is something to Google's expansion here. I think there's a bigger picture here that goes a little bit beyond what we were speculating last week, where clearly Google's starting to use this as a financial component of their larger business. But this notion that the Chromebooks are slowly and surely becoming super multifunctional devices, I think is really important. And the screen capture tool, and I've used this. It's in beta right now, where you can turn it on with a flag, and it's pretty good. It's not great. The stuff from, well, name your favorite Chrome plugin for screencasting, they're better. But considering it's native and it's just built right in, it's pretty solid.
Yeah. In our chat room, Peggy's commenting about Google, really focusing on education. And I replied that, the Learning with Google event, which I would encourage everybody to watch. I'll put the link in the show notes again tonight for you to check out. They they're listening really well to educators, and they're responding worldwide. I mean, one of the biggest things, and please don't get me wrong. I love my Apple stuff, and please don't take away my my laptop. We're using Chromebooks, but I don't want to give up my Mac or any of my Apple devices. But Google is so focused on what people have and recognizing that the smartphone. I did a presentation this last week for actually about 200 teachers in Albania over Zoom, which is really cool. I did a session on smartphone storytelling. But the reason I chose that as my topic is that the webinar hosts or sponsors, the professional development group that does free PD for Albanian teachers, said that the smartphone has been the connecting device. Many teachers have used, maybe I already said this on the show, WhatsApp groups. The kids, that's what they've got. If they have a device, they have a smartphone. So the way in which Google has extended the function to not just computers but also smartphones, they're doing a lot for offline, recognizing that kids can have intermittent Wi-Fi. They may not have Wi-Fi at home. They may have to go download stuff and then go back. And anyway, just the global reach that they have and the variety. We talk about connectivity problems here in the United States, which we do have, but there's a lot of places in the world where connectivity is a lot more challenging than it is more than likely in the United States community that with E-rate and all the different things that we have, rural connectivity, and we've got a section on that again tonight because we talk about that frequently. But great to see Google making these responses, and it'll be interesting, Jason, as you get some more ideas and sort of senses of it. We're not seeing Google come out and say, "Hey, we're pivoting, we're changing," but just like the release of their chief education evangelist that we heard of the Mountain Mood was like, what's up with that? That's, if not a harbinger, if I'm using that word, pronouncing that correct. I mean, it appears that there's more going on, which we don't exactly know what that is. But on my Geek of the Week, I have a Google related Geek of the Week, and Google's a fascinating company, and they've continued to evolve and change from their roots in many ways, and it's continuing to happen. But they're profitable. They're continuing to meet tremendous need. And oh my gosh, do we have needs today for digital interactive learning in the COVID-19 world? And hey, if it was all just a pay to play, situation, there'd be lots and lots of schools that would be hurting much more than they are. And we are hurting as a nation and a world educationally because of what we're in.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, where'd you next, sir?
Actually, let's pick up the rest of the Google articles because you've got some good ones there. Well, I'll just real quick say that the Kevin Toffel post from February 19th is a bit of a rant, but it's still good. 10 years of Chromebooks and people still don't know what they're capable of. It's really a criticism of an article that someone else wrote over on T3, but it's pointing out that there is a lot of app capability, especially via Linux, and there's ways that you can just wipe this out. And, you can even, if you want to be pretty geeky, you can still run Windows, but, Office apps. And so anyway, Kevin is the defender of Chromebooks with his About Chromebooks website. But then, Jason, would you pick up the top one about supervised YouTube? Because I had not heard of that, and that sounds pretty significant.
Yeah, it's an app, and Google apparently is rolling out soon. It's called Supervised YouTube, and it's intended for older kids and teens, and it's coming soon. Is the piece of information that's a little generic, but the idea here is that YouTube Kids, which was a little controversial to start off with, but my understanding is cleaned up dramatically in the last year or so, as YouTube figured out pretty quickly that you can't, say this is a safe app for kids and then have a bunch of garbage on there that you really wouldn't want kids to see. But the idea behind this new offering, Supervised YouTube, is that you as a parent can set up this YouTube app, right, that's connected with yours, and Apple really dominated the early market on this. Lately, Google has been doing a lot of great stuff on supervised accounts on Chromebooks and on Android phones, to the point of which it's becoming very competitive, I think, with Apple's offerings. But there's really basically three levels of YouTube access you can give to a kid, and they've got recommended ages here. But it's basically Explore, which is really when you're ready to graduate from YouTube Kids. So, probably less animation, less singing, and more things like how-to videos, gaming videos, music clips, news, educational content, tutorials, etc. And then that's intended for viewers 9+. Then there's Explore More, which is kind of intended for kids age 13 and more. It adds live streams as a possibility and a larger set of videos, so things aimed at a more teen crowd. And then most of YouTube, which basically is everything except for things that specifically age-restricted content, and really appropriate for older teens. And parents can also manage their watch and search history. They can look at what they're watching. They can block specific videos. It's my understanding. I saw another article about this that said that you can also add videos to the library for kids too, but I didn't really understand. It was the other article I looked at was as generic as this one, but this idea of just not giving open YouTube, and YouTube is really kind of what you make out of it, right? Like when you start going down a rabbit hole in YouTube, it starts delivering you more content, as we've talked about in the past, right? We've talked about this in context of radical political videos, but I think it's a really smart thing on behalf of YouTube. And I think when you can give parents more options, you can always just give your kid the YouTube app, right? That's a possibility here. But if you'd like more control and you want to take more proactive parenting steps to help your kid manage the extraordinary amount of information on the internet, I think this is a smart move.
Peggy's pointing out, of course, teens do always find ways to get around tools that limit. They can go to friends' houses, and
Certainly.
that is certainly true. I think a level of this is just kind of responding to parental angst and putting some stuff out there. I am really close to suggesting at school. We did a parent university this past fall about the social dilemma that I think was really well received. And I've been wanting to do one about YouTube radicalization, which would get into a lot of issues, but just like how important it is to be checking in with our kids on the YouTubers we're following. Who are we subscribed to? Who are we watching? There's all kinds of layers. I mean, you may not be, your kid may not be getting recruited for ISIS or for a white nationalist group. They may just be, watching a lot of, quote, influencers with certain kinds of products or ordering stuff. I mean, it was a year or so ago when our daughter ordered some kind of like drink, something that was from Australia, from somebody that was like a body glow thing. We're like, what is this? You're going to put this in your body? And, there's there's less boundaries today than ever. And some of those, I mean, it's not just thinking about mental health and toxicity. I mean, there are, there's all kinds of behaviors, there's products, there's a lot. It's crazy. It's a Wild West. And I definitely think that, parents need tools and help with this. So I'm glad to hear that they're stepping this up. And, anyway, that may be something we do. Obviously there's all kinds of stuff going on. And we've been surviving as teachers during the pandemic, and extra kinds of things that we might have done in the past with regard to parent education sessions and stuff. It hasn't had the priority this year that it might have had in the past. But I don't think it's something we should ignore, and so I'm glad to know about that. And anyway, I'll share some more if we end up doing something like that. But YouTube is a vital communication platform today. And we would be, I would use the word remiss, but if we as a school were not utilizing YouTube and leveraging it in powerful ways, I don't think we would be providing students with a relevant 21st century education. And I'm talking especially about middle and high school, but even our younger kids, we're using those safe sharing websites that'll strip out, related links and things like that. But there's look at the Mars rover, look at Perseverance, look at the ways that NASA and JPL are sharing things, and rocket launches, and just all kinds of stuff. But it's a tangled web, with a lot of different issues, and we do need tools and education to try to figure out how to best navigate this. Because I don't think saying to your child, I'm not going to let you on YouTube until you're 18 and you're leaving my home, is a good, and I don't know how many parents would be actually taking it to that extreme, but we certainly do have some at a middle school level that want to ban YouTube altogether. And we've had to have conversations about, well, we use that because of instruction, and these are the safety things that we take, but anyway, they're important conversations to have.
Right. Well, and then I would also add that, YouTube is the largest collection of video in human history. So I realize a lot of that could be considered low value video, but remember, there are very few museums, for example, that don't have extraordinary YouTube channels. There are very few archives that don't have extraordinary YouTube channels. And in fact, I'm going to share today, it's not YouTube, but my Geek of the Week today will be about a sharing archive that is digital. And I think that's the bottom line where things are going. So,
yeah. All right. Well, we've got a bunch of other directions to take in about 20 more minutes. So where would you like to go next?
Well, let me do. The problem is every topic we have tonight is an epic rabbit hole. Let's do the connectivity articles because they're pretty timely. Great article from The Verge on February 22nd. Elon Musk's Starlink is apparently going to hit 300 megabits down later this year, and it's not happening quite yet. But my parents, my in-laws are going to be picking up Starlink. I think they're going to invest the $600 in hardware and $100 a month to get that service. They currently have what would be politely described as not great internet, and from my understanding, I now know 4 or 5 people that are accessing this in some way, shape, or form, is that I think their early experiment was called the better than nothing plan, which is if you have no other options or access, then this is better than nothing. But I haven't seen any criticism of it yet, to be honest. And there's been a lot of videos about Starlink, but it was capped-ish at 100 megabits, although a lot of people report getting more access than that. The other thing that is also a problem with Starlink right now, although it's not as bad as I think it comes off, is that there are latency issues, which means that the speed of which it gets to you, not the amount it can say at once, but the speed it gets to you is slower than traditional hardwired internet, although generally faster than like cell tower option internet.
And way faster than the Hughes internet, the Hughes satellite stuff. If you have anybody or been familiar with the previous generations of satellite based internet, so yeah, that is exciting for sure. And I think that the availability of both 5G and then Starlink powered connectivity, it's going to be big impact for rural communities. Let's say that. I think, I guess 5G would only be if you get it. It's more Starlink is going to have that impact. I know what I was going to say. You were talking about pushback and feedback. We have some vendors actually file suit, and that may have been an article we didn't talk about in the show, but it made it on the list. Try to tell, like the FCC or whatever, a judge, hey, Starlink and Elon Musk are writing checks their body can't cash kind of thing. Like there's no way they're going to be able to, get to these speeds. Therefore, these grants of money that you're giving them should not be given to Starlink. It needs to be given to other companies to provide that service. And so this is a direct answer to those, I think, saying, hey, yeah, look at the speed that we are going to be able to achieve. We're going to be able to deliver. Now they have to also, deliver in a wide area and at scale, but the speed stuff seems to be a good bit of news.
Right. And then another quick article. This is from CNET today. A reviewer picked up T-Mobile's $50 unlimited home internet service, which would go over cell towers. And that's not a model that is that common in the United States. If you go to Europe, there's a lot of broadband providers that utilize cell tower internet to provide home internet. 3 in Italy, for example, is a popular cell provider. You can walk into a 3 store in Italy. I've done this trying to get a local SIM card when I was traveling in Italy to have local cell access via my cell phone. And they'll sell you a little box that literally plugs into the electrical receptacle in your home, and then becomes a Wi-Fi hotspot so that you can access 3's internet tower based internet. And a lot of folks use that exclusively. It's not nearly as common in the United States, but T-Mobile has announced this $50 home internet service, which is pretty cheap. And the reviewer, had minor problems with it, but otherwise it was pretty fast. The speed did vary throughout the day, which would be a big difference between using a cell tower internet and, if you were getting cable internet at home. That cable internet tends to stay pretty stable speed-wise, whereas you're competing with other devices on T-Mobile. So if that's of interest to you, that's a great CNET article that kind of walks you through the good news, bad news of that model.
The speeds in that article too are pretty amazing, and author found location can make a really big difference, not only within your house, but of course where you happen to be, relative to towers and things like that. But it's a very promising article. All right, let's talk Facebook and Australia. I think we've got these articles down under the tech correction. you put, I think, the BBC News article from February 23rd update, Facebook reverses ban on news pages in Australia. I put the Facebook blog post, which I think was originally from February 17th, updated also on the 22nd. So I'll kind of try to share my summary of this, and then, we'll see what your ideas are. Basically, Australian legislators faced off, and people are comparing this to like a David and Goliath, kind of thing. But we've got a lot of folks who are in the traditional journalism and media world, that are upset that their revenues have been cut, and these companies, Facebook and Google specifically, profit a great deal when they don't spend anything for the links, and so they should be paying. And so there was legislation that had been threatened that was going to require them being Facebook and Google, to pay the companies on a per link basis for everything that they shared. And, that was going to generate a considerable amount of revenue. But I mean, it almost threatens the fundamental, not laws, but, ways the internet works, which is like, yeah, you hyperlink to stuff. And yeah, that's how the web works. It's not like you hyperlink and pay. So Google had negotiated a deal. And by the way, Rupert Murdoch, I guess, is one of the main folks as far as, and he's, he owns, what is he? Does he own? The Washington Post is owned by Bezos now, right?
Yep.
But Murdoch has got a big empire. Does he own Fox? Maybe I should know these things.
Yeah, I should. I think that you're right. Yes.
Yeah. And then he owns a bunch of Australia. He's a big media mogul. And so anyway, he's Australian. And he's behind a lot of this. So Google kowtowed, or they acquiesced, and they have paid. Facebook, on the other hand, bowed up their back and said, no. Now, I should back up. Google threatened to shut down their search service and everything in Australia when they have 98% of the search market there. But after those threats, evidently there was some deals, and they signed some things with companies where money is exchanging hands. Google is paying. And so Google was kind of stepped out, but Facebook bowed up their back and said, no, we're just going to stop all of your links news organizations in Australia from working. And then there were all these different issues that happened where, companies were flagged as news agencies, which weren't. And anyway, and then there was a shuffle. And now Facebook says, hey, we've reached an agreement, and we think Australia is going to be reasonable. So that sounds like the legislation isn't going to happen. That's about the extent of my perceptions of what's going on. So can you clarify that for us further, sir?
Yeah, well, my understanding of the situation too is that Facebook, it looks like they kind of were trying to make a point, but also they didn't want to be compelled to pay for links to news that were posted by the news folks themselves. Like they didn't want to basically be forced to pay for things that they weren't in charge of actually delivering via the platform. And apparently they've worked something out. And the other thing they talked about, which I know this kind of seems like a smokescreen, was that they also wanted to be able to focus on local and independent providers and not just big national providers. So I don't really understand how this works yet either, other than to say I think the story continues. And it's complicated, right? Like that as people figure out what the broader tech correction is going to look like, things are going to be cloudy for a long time to come. And as we've discussed dozens of times on this podcast, at some point we got to figure this out, but there's going to be no clear solution.
What about the CNN Business article you put in? The World Wide Web as we know it may be ending. There's a little bit of a clickbaity tech correction headline for you.
Terrible headline, but also not that inaccurate. So CNN Business reports today, they talk about the increasing problem with different internets around the world. And they mention the Australia issue as kind of a introduction to it. But The idea here is that as time is moving on, the idea of the internet, which was a generic wire that was neutral, that everyone had access to, and that everyone's content and bits could be equally accessed everywhere on the network, that idea is slowly dying because of both global events and also some of the fights we've talked about here in the past. And the fractured internet is sometimes the way this is referred to. The idea that the internet looks different in China than it does in most of the West. The idea that Russia seems to be building a shadow internet that would be a place that Russians could be directed to with little or no access to the outside world. Iran is known for having a lot of internal properties that are only accessible internally, but also people are redirected there on a frequent basis. That obviously we talked about in the past how that's concerning, in part because if we can have segregated internets like this, there's no reason why we couldn't also do that in, like, even inside a country, where we could create tiers of internet that end up costing people and get rid of the notion of the democratizing, or at least the freeing of information that comes with the internet. But this particular author, this is Rishi Iyengar, talks about this notion. He calls it the splinter net, is one of the terms he used. But there's a reckoning that seems to be coming, and at some point there may be multiple and even competing networks that refer to themselves as the internet.
And we've talked about this on the show. I mean, we've the Huawei, like, was it CFO? I mean, is still, I'll there's a quick article I'll do from the Winnipeg News that actually referenced that. Let's see, I have this under miscellaneous. Chinese ambassador denounces pending vote by Canadian MPs on Uyghur genocide, from the Winnipeg Free Press on February 20th. I put that in because China is the surveillance state. I mean, in Western China, the Uyghur Muslim minority is subjected to a level of not just content filtering, but monitoring that is just, over the top. And it, that is just a horrific example of how technology can be used to oppress and suppress an entire, basically, it's like a province, I guess, but it's the size of a nation. So anyway, it's bad. We've talked about on the show is in terms of China and U.S. relations, the conflicts over standards and the deployment of 5G and network gear, and how the United States has, certainly under the Trump administration, and it's going to be interesting to see if this shifts at all under Biden, was pushing countries to absolutely reject Chinese technology and install US or European router systems. And this question of, are we going to have at the router and network infrastructure levels a different internet and a fractured internet? So we continue to see authoritarian regimes, Saudi Arabia, we mentioned Iran, a lot in the Middle East, the Soviet Union, what should I say? Soviet Union, Russia, China, different countries that are, they have a lot of problems with a free and open internet, and they're doing a lot of, they're utilizing the tools of centralized control, which I think it's kind of the trajectory of IT, is that, these tools get more and more powerful, but the tools at the disposal of your admins can get even more powerful as well. We see that manifested in some different ways here in the United States. For instance, we've talked about quotas on connectivity, and being charged for landline consumption of internet, which is not something that we've typically had in the United States. We've had that with cellular, but not with landline. So anyway, that's a lot to just kind of throw out there, but it's a mess, and
it is.
We're not. We're not seeing, I don't think, the championing at a national level of the open and free internet that's going to bring us closer together as a globe and as a planet. And I think we need that. And I don't know how we change this trajectory, because we are fractured, and we seem to be moving further towards that. vision, unfortunately.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Wes, it looks like we are quickly coming to the top of the hour. Is there anything else you want to get in this week in our list?
Oh, well, let's see. Here's a couple just fast ones. So this is kind of fun. This is a biotech article. This is from phys.org on February 23rd. It's titled Researchers Invent New Gene Editing Tool, but it's really an improvement on CRISPR, which is a technology that we've talked about on the show. It's been a while. But CRISPR uses Cas9 to make a snip in DNA and then have repairs happen. This new procedure allows there to be a time-based sequence to that, so that if the gene editing needs to, edit this and fix this, and then this, and then this, it is more sophisticated. So that's pretty huge. And just that capability to edit genes. I gave a chapel talk a couple weeks ago and just happened to talk about the vaccine and how it's not going to edit our DNA or change our DNA. That's some disinformation that has been put out there by some anti-vax groups and others that are wanting to instill fear in the United States population and others about the vaccine. But it builds on, lots of technology having to do with the ways in which proteins and cells function, and RNA and messenger RNA, just incredible stuff. Let's see. Here's one that we're not going to spend nearly enough time, but we mentioned this a few weeks ago on the show. Timnit Gebru was on the Google AI ethics team, and another leader at Google, whose Twitter handle is mmitchell_AI, wrote a Google Doc on February 5th called On the Firing of Dr. Timnit Gebru. And she herself was fired this last week from Google. And this is really bad. The article that she wrote talks about how the initial firing of Timnit Gebru was terrible. Like, if we can't figure out what's going on with education in Google, how do we figure out this? But this just does not seem wise. And when you have an ethics board, and then somebody's publishing something independently that's going to be, could be perceived as critical of you, it flies in the face of what you would think Google is and what they would stand for, to just fire her and then to fire somebody else who's part of that same team. It just looks pretty bad. So I don't have any independent insight into this other than to say, I know it's a very important issue, and it's something that we should be tracking and following. So maybe I'm sure we will have some tech analysts and others who are going to write some more about it. And maybe we can find some of those and talk about that next week.
Yep. Sounds great.
Okay. Do you want a Geek of the Week?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but one of my favorite websites that's a kind of a rabbit hole, and I do utilize it occasionally for projects. The New York Public Library has a wonderful digital collections page. It's 1 million objects large, well, nearly 1 million objects large now, and they've been digitizing a lot of the things in their collection really since the internet started, and a lot of it is freely downloadable. It's usable in projects, and a lot of it is you may not have any direct value for, other than it's interesting. For example, they've got phone books going back decades and decades and decades and decades, but they do have nearly 1 million objects now. If you are, for example, a history teacher, the reason why I need to look at this recently is that I'm working on a little side project that I needed some images, some high quality images about U.S. soldiers in World War I. I was able to find some that were freely licensed in about 10 minutes that I could download high quality archival quality versions of. So that's the New York Public Library digital collections page.
Awesome. And my recommendation tonight is a podcast, one that I, in fact, just started today, thanks to the Vox podcast, Today Explained, which I will listen to usually about once a week. This is a new series that Vox has started called Land of the Giants. And so this is just 3 episodes old, but the first one is really a deep dive into Amazon and Jeff Bezos. The second one is a dive into Netflix, and then the So I guess I'm in season 3 because the one I've started has been the Google Empire. Okay, so sorry, I haven't gone back far enough, but I listened to 2 of them. The Google the Google Empire is the preview, but the Search Begins, which is 40 minutes, and then I listened to Chrome and the Android Wars. So it's historical, but really tracing how Google as a company, where they came from, and how they've evolved and changed. And season 3, which is all about Google, is ongoing. So certainly timely as we talk about the tech correction and things that are happening in Australia and all this. There'll be some good analysis, I think, that'll come from that. But definitely recommend Vox for their podcasts, and glad to be tuning into this new show. So Dr. Neiffer, when you're not here pontificating, where can folks connect with you?
Well, I pontificate on Twitter all the time at Tech Savvy Teach. I also pontificate for the Montana Digital Academy, montanadigitalacademy.org. And a final reminder, Sunday, February 28th is the last day of early bird pricing for the Northwest Council for Computer Education. Where actually, if I will be pontificating at that conference as well. So ncc.org/conference21. I think I'm doing 5 presentations this year, including a new one I'm really excited about called Advanced Chromebookology. And so please go to ncc.org/conference2021. It's a very flexible conference. You can either do it live or access all the content for 90 days after the conference is over with, and we're real excited about it. I think it's going to be a great virtual event, and join us this year online. Join us next year back in Seattle, Washington for the best EdTech conference that is not 30,000 people. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah, and there's actually a number of those that are a little bit smaller that tend to be good.
Yeah.
So I am W Fryer on the Twitters. You can find lots of links to learn with me at wesfryer.com/after. And this has been the EdTech Situation Room. We are a weekly Wednesday evening web show and podcast where we talk about the past week's technology news through an educational lens. We want to thank Peggy George for joining us live, and invite anybody who can to join us live at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, and whatever that might correlate to in your neck of the woods. You can access the show notes for tonight's show on our episode, which will also have a small 32 kilobit MP3 and a 100-ish megabyte video version, but you can always subscribe on YouTube. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter at EdTechSR, and you can also always go to our website, edtechsr.com, where in addition to getting our episodes and links, you can link to our enormous Google Doc, which we've already referenced. That is at edtechsr.com/links. So thank you so much. Until next time, we encourage you to stay savvy, stay safe, watch out for the malware, and hopefully we'll find out how to identify if we've got this thing on our M1 Macs. I don't have an M1 Mac anymore, so maybe I'm okay. Yeah, who knows?
Good night.
Good night.